My name is Agnes Zengeya, and welcome to our second edition of Straight Talk. Today I've got our guest here with us, and I'd like him to introduce himself. What is your name, sir?
Thank you, Agnes. My name is Lloyd Msipa. I'm a lawyer, political analyst, director of Public Policy Research Institute. We're also researchers. We are professionals in policy issues. We prefer solutions to the African continent. We work with the Zimbabwean government, the South African government, as APRE, which stands for Africa Public Policy Research Institute. So, we are friends of Africa.
Right.
Yeah? Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And to my right, I have...
Your brother, Itai Machipisa.
Yes.
I'm just here to be the devil's advocate, just to make you sweat.
Well, happy days. So, to begin with, I think we'll just go back into history and slowly move forward. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we've had 37 years of Mugabe's rule, and we are now in the new dispensation. And so, your company, organization mm-hmm. that you run, informs policies. So that is quite a great role.
APRE is it's not run by myself as an individual. It's a panel of experts. It's a grouping of experts, an organization that has put experts in different disciplines together, and whether it's engineering, law, governance, health. These are experts that are looking and working with governments in that regard. We mirror government departments, whether it's health, whether it's finance, and we work with them, supporting them in their policy, structuring. That's how we work.
Okay, and how long have you been running your organization?
The organization is 2 years old, and we've actually started working with the Zimbabwean government as recently as after the power transfer of November last year. Before, yes, we would engage with the government, but we found that actually now they've been more receptive after the change of guard in Harare than before. So we're seeing a lot of positive things coming out of it.
Okay, so the new dispensation has opened new doors for your organization, it seems. What is your major role when you're working with the government?
We see Zimbabwe. You say 37 years of Mugabe rule, but even before Mugabe there was Ian Smith, and so Zimbabwe has a long history from the days of colonialism, 1890, the death of Mpiane and Seguruka Govi, and then go through the 60s, the nationalist parties, Apozano, independence, the land issue. All that must be looked at in the context, not as what informs the now is the past. So we have to have that understanding of where we've been, or where Zimbabwe has been as a country, and that what informs the policy considerations today. So we should never look at Zimbabwe as outside the remit of where it has been as a country, the people's experiences, the war of liberation, and where they are now. And I think it's the same with any country, really. You have to look at the history of that country, what the people have been through, and what they are going through now. Yeah. So,
if we take what you're saying, as in we should look at things from the perspective of the past, and that what is going on now should be looked at that. What gave birth to your organization, and how did it come to function as it is now?
Right. The organization is made out of African professionals that have pretty much, most of them, been educated or furthered their education here in the diaspora, and we started looking at our own countries. The shortcomings. Why is Africa what it is? Why is the richest continent on earth still the poorest? Where are we struggling? Is it governance issues? Why do we have guys wanting to overstay, their welcome? Why do we have 8-year-old presidents while other countries are running, 30, 40-year-old presidents. So we have to look at the political culture. What is it that informed our culture in the past, and what's informing our culture now? So we realize that in Africa, politics is always the elephant in the room. So if the politics is the elephant in the room, it means every other area suffers, because politics will inform how the health sector is performing. Politics informs how the engineering, what the state of our roads are informed by the politics of the country. So we need to get to a place, or we advise governments, work with governments to get to a place where politics does not, remain the elephant in the room. Let's put national interests first before, party contestation.
So, as I said, we're going back a little bit, and one of the most interesting thing about going back when we talk about Zimbabwe per se, we know that land has been an issue, and we know that there was a conference in America where they were talking about Zimbabwe, and you had Zimbabweans talking, i.e. the farmers that had lost farms during the land redistribution, talking about compensation or getting farms back. I know that the language of saying lost farms sometimes is a language that fellow Zimbabweans don't want to hear, because people say, well, was it their land to lose in the first place?
Right.
But in terms of nation building and moving forward, where do you think we are with the land issue?
We need to have the general understanding that land defines who we are. We are nothing in the absence of the land. Mondoro Zedu, the chiefs were identified by a region. This is Chief so and so from such and such a region. It's the land, Chief Sogwala from Sogwala, Chief Madziva from Madziva. So our land defined us. So when that was taken away from us, we became a people without an identity. And that is what caused the war of liberation. That what caused even aspiring intellectuals like the Mugabes and others to pick up the gun and go and fight. When we finally got to a point where we're now negotiating Lancaster, for instance, land was central to that. Fast forward to 2000 Land Acquisition Act, the land has been redistributed, because land is a key component of who we are. Yes, the distribution exercise didn't go according. It was not the best of models, but let's be realistic. Let us be clear that without land redistribution, the way it happened, it was haphazard. In the same way, when these guys took the land, it was a haphazard process. So we need to be very clear on where we are now. Moving on, the audits that are taking place now is what will now bring us to 21st century, land ownership models, where those who are capable of using or utilizing the land can now benefit from it.
But before we talk about auditing and redistributing it again, now politically, land has been...
It's not redistributing it again. It's refining the redistribution model that's already in place.
Okay, on the distribution of land, redistribution of land, of course, people had political alignments in terms of, I am ZANU-PF, therefore I'm going to get land. Or how can I say this? If I'm not ZANU-PF, I'm not going to be deserving of the land. So now that we're going into these elections now, and we have a new leader of ZANU-PF, is it going to be that if you're not a ZANU-PF member, you can get the land? Are you going to show your allegiance to ZANU-PF to be able to get the land?
Let us be clear. When we're looking at the policy issues on the land, the Land Acquisition Act of 2000 did not specify ZANU, ZAPU, MDC, whatever.
No, that's on paper, but when we're talking practically, does that happen, that if I am not showing allegiance?
Practically what happened is that those who tended to be ZANU-PF members applied for pieces of land. And those who were not, whether it was through perception that they were not entitled to it, they did not apply. Some did.
Not entitled to allegiance, you mean?
It's perception, really. Yeah, perception. Because you will find that senior members of opposition parties do have farms. So they did apply. Whether they would have advised their members to do so, that's another story. But the long and short of it all is that land is passed over to the Zimbabweans, And those, yes, who benefited are predominantly ZANU-PF. And as time goes on, as we spoke about the land audit, that will probably be, will be sorted out. So it is not a political party thing. It was a government initiative that everybody should get a piece of land.
When we are talking about land now in the new dispensation, what are the positives to look out for? Because what I'm understanding is land issue is not an issue. What was done has been done, but we are going to move on and probably modify and make it better. What are the positives that people can look forward to in terms of land auditing and distribution?
If you look at the policy considerations back then, when they were putting forward the Land Acquisition Act, the idea back then was to have a parallel process of having the economy being owned by the locals, being empowered through the Indigenization Act. So the land acquisition exercise was supposed to run in tandem with the Indigenization Act, so that the money coming out of the indigenization will empower those that are acquiring land to be able to boost and production and so on. But because the Indigenization Act did not take off as it should have, because the country went into the sanctions land, and there was no buy-in from the well-wishers in terms of money. So we had the Land Acquisition Act going forward, but the economy, nothing was happening.
But
sort of finish what she had. So going forward, the land refining now is going to be done under this new dispensation, which is pushing the economic fundamentals through the investment. People are coming in. Zimbabwe is open for business, so it is now easier to use the windfall of investments, the FDIs, to now push the land redistribution exercise to higher levels in terms of production. Maize, grain, you've heard of the command agriculture. That is government encouraging private citizens to be active in that area.
Okay, when we talk about land...
My brother wanted to say something there.
Itai, before I ask a fundamental question.
I am a true capitalist, and I understand one thing when you say command. I hear socialism throughout, and that's what we had before. That's what led Zimbabwe down the spiral it went through.
Right.
So what I would want is to hear that Zimbabwe is open for business, and the policies support business, so that people don't need to actually ask for permission to actually perform in business. Because the problem is, when you say command agriculture, that, to me, that is control. Things like GMB, I don't support, because that means there's only one buyer, and you need a license to be able to move your own product to go and sell. And you're selling it under the price of the international trading prices, or whatever prices that are out there.
Fair enough.
And then the government is taking that maize from me at a lower price and then selling it off there at a higher price. So it's actually taxing me in another way.
The command aspect, the command aspect, because remember, government, okay, let's agree on one thing. Government is there to create an enabling environment.
A referee.
For not necessarily a referee, but create an environment so the private player, the capitalist, as you put it, can engage in business to the benefit of the country and for profit. But at the same time, the government has a responsibility to make sure that the coffers, the state, the reserves, food reserves, are full, because calamities do happen.
For food security.
For food security. So the command aspect is designed to make sure that is in place. And with regards to where, as a private player, where you sell your grain or whatever you grow, you don't have to sell it to state parastatals. You can sell it privately. That is where we are going. Excuse me. So generally speaking, we are catering for, the government is catering for both the private player and the government player, so that there is no contradiction, as in the past, where you say you put your hands in the private players, and then when they let you down, that means the entire country goes down.
Actually, we never had that in Zimbabwe. We never had private players without government intervention.
Yes.
In countries that operate where there is private players in the market, whenever one private player fails, another one steps in, or another is already there to take advantage. So you will never have a situation in this country where you find bread not being produced by one company, and then everyone is out of bread. There's always someone to replace them.
I agree with you completely that obviously the more the merrier. Yeah, but what we are saying is not in all countries that you mentioned, the government is always there to guarantee the welfare aspect of citizens, whilst allowing the private player, to grow the economy. As you rightfully said, bread will have various companies. In the same vein that the people who produce grain will be, different farmers, different players. The same people who, manufacture cigarettes will be different players. All that is being encouraged. That is where the new dispensation comes in. That is where Zimbabwe is open for business comes in. And it does not take away the government's mandate or responsibility to make sure that there's food security in the country.
Right, thank you. Just before we round off on the question of land, what is the international expectation on land? Because what we saw, like I said, in America, they had a conference and they talked about land. And of course, there was land issue being discussed with a minority of Zimbabweans and in a foreign land where I didn't think the question of land was well exhausted. What do you understand is the expectation of our foreign counterparts on land and distribution and compensation, i.e. for the farmers that feel that it didn't go according to their favor?
Let's understand the political argument that land that resulted in the land redistribution or land grab, as some guys want to put it. The politics behind it was willing seller, willing buyer for 10 years. After that, the British government will finance the land acquisition. But as you are seeing in South Africa today, there were contradictions with that because the government will have the money or might have the money, but there are no farmers that want to sell. So how do you empower your own people with land if those who are holding the land do not want to sell? You now say, okay, we're going to take the land by force. And then when you say you're taking the land by force, those who were prepared to finance the land redistribution exercise say, then in that case, we won't give you our money. So you end up having to take the land without compensation. That's what happened. So caught in between was land that belonged to other countries that were protected by BIPA agreements. These are bilateral legal agreements between countries, and generally they should be respected under international law. And I think there are 4 cases at international law that have been given judgment against the Zimbabwean government with regard to that. And there's one from a private citizen, I think it's Campbell, the Campbell case, the one from the SADC tribunal. Right, the ED administration has acknowledged those, and they say, look, they will compensate, and where it's practical to do so, in terms of the law. Now, the international expectation should never take precedence over national expectation.
Yes.
So that is the key thing. See,
That's
the
right.
international people or individuals can say we want Zimbabwe to do A, B, C, D. But I think the Zimbabwean expectation takes precedence over. And precedence is that those who want to farm, those who want to utilize the land and produce for Zimbabwe, should be given preference. It doesn't matter whether you're black or you're white, as long as you're willing to produce for your country and move the country forward through agriculture or using the land for other things like tourism, keeping animals, and so on. So national interest is key, and I think what we've also been advising as an organization, and what the current government, they are buying into that idea that national interest before anything else. Because it's one, you cannot please everybody in the world, but as long as you are adhering to the laws, and these 5 cases I think are going to be textbook cases where the Zimbabwe government will be seen to be adhering to international law. So national interest first, everything else falls in line.
Wow, that sounds quite exhaustive, but I think when it comes to land, we need a whole day and probably a bigger audience to talk about the subject exhaustively. But however, talking about land and today's current situation. Recently, we found out about marijuana farming.
Okay, marijuana farming.
What do you say about that?
Yes, I've seen little videos circulating on social media, and I think there's a general misunderstanding amongst our people of what the government is trying to do or say. The government has not said we have legalized the growing of mbanje. What they've simply said is they've identified the medicinal potential in this crop called marijuana. And what they are prepared to do is to license organizations that can actually do something with that particular product. So it's not a matter of, suddenly we can grow mbanje at the back of my garden. No, you have to approach the government, put in a proposal and say this is how you're going to do it. You're going to either build a manufacturing plant, or you're going to do A, B, C, D to extract that medicinal product in marijuana and then sell it on. So the license is based on your capacity to do that. It's not any jig and Jill or from nowhere simply going by in your back garden. You will be arrested. The law is not changing.
But why though? Because what I find is that marijuana is not as dangerous to society as alcohol or even tobacco.
Yeah, but then that's a separate argument. You see, that is now a moral argument.
Besides the moral argument, when
can
we
I interject both of you? I think the issue is when you talk about legalizing the farming of marijuana, you can't talk about that without talking about the social responsibility, which is, I think, it does take precedence in terms of concern. How do we break down this, Itai? What do you say? I think that's what you're trying to balance.
I'm not a moralist. I'm thinking out loud as saying you should be able to do what you do without harming another person. That's all I'm fighting for here. But the licensing part is where I don't understand, because from what the government is being saying is that it's open for business, but it doesn't seem it's open for business when you're putting barriers like, for example, what I'm hearing is 50,000 for you to be able to get a license. 50,000 is not what an average Zimbabwean can get.
That's what social media is.
So it's a speculation.
Those are speculative issues. The truth of the matter is, the issue of mbanje has always been a social issue in Zimbabwe. People still smoke it. People grow it in little pots all over the place. That is not a secret. So mbanje is still underused in whatever shape or form. The issue here is the commercial. When you talk of commercial, we're talking about acres and acres of marijuana being grown under license, for harvesting for medicinal purposes, not for smoking in your back garden.
Not for leisure.
No, not for leisure. That. So whoever gets that license and is doing the commercial farming of it, is also the license ties that person to the responsibility of making sure that it doesn't end up
fall in the hands of people who are selling it on the roads.
Exactly.
Then my problem is that then I'm thinking, if you're allowed to sell tobacco, sell alcohol, why are you not allowed to sell marijuana?
Yeah, but then that's an argument that you make to government and say, look, you want them to legalize marijuana for social use.
Okay,
but which is completely different.
I understand that's a different issue. But my issue now is the licensing. Seems to me as if this is just another way of them raising revenue for their own. Because that license, where's that money going to go to?
The government, as we spoke earlier, has a responsibility of creating an enabling environment for business. And it can be in the health sector, pharmaceutical, engineering, legal, you name it, agriculture. When it takes these fees, remember, we don't know what fees they are. The fees are there to make that facilitation of the licensing. And you'll find that after the government has received the fees, and it's a private player doing the commercial growing and processing of mbanje or marijuana, the government benefits through taxes, and therefore when the taxes come into the treasury, they trickle down to you and me and to our brothers and sisters through the welfare system and other
supposed to be.
That's the idea. That is what we are advising. That's Zimbabwe coming back to itself, to the main. Yes, we acknowledge. Let us be clear that the systems are broken down. But how do we rebuild them if we are not, if we are skeptical about each other?
No.
You know, let us put the trust back into the government. They have said this is what we're going to do, and the idea is to hold the government to account at each point. Whatever point you get your point, hold them to account. And guess what? Now there's a mechanism that you can now use. It's called the Zimbabwe Constitution. Any leader is only there for 5 years. So if the guy does not perform in 5 years, guess what?
No,
you kick him out. Simple.
Well,
you know,
my argument here is I understand governments should be referees. They shouldn't be players. Right now, it seems as if Zimbabwean government is actually a major player, because if they're saying they are going to be the ones deciding who's going to be the producer of this marijuana, that means they are actually going to be...
in that regard, let us be honest with that. Governments right through the world are players. They determine who sells. For example, what you have here, you've got Sainsbury's, you've got Asda, and they were talking of merging. But the Anti-Competition Commission said no, you cannot merge because it will disadvantage another supermarket. The Anti-Competition is a government.
So there's
department.
That's my argument. That's my argument. That's my argument.
That's what government does.
It's a referee.
Yes,
it's a referee.
It's a regulatory.
But it's a referee. It's not playing the game, though.
No, it is playing, because if left to their own devices, they would merge and squeeze out the small guy.
No, but that's what the referee does. It stops you from playing
exactly
unfair.
what the Zimbabwean government is doing.
But do we not need regulators, though?
No, we do need regulation. I'm not saying I'm not an anarchist. I'm saying we need a referee. But now the Zimbabwean government never plays itself as a referee because
I don't. These guys have been around for less than 6 months. I don't see how you can make that judgment.
Technically they have been around for 6 months. But
Yeah.
they are the same guys that have been in government for the past 30 years.
Surviving the change of guard is going to be difficult for the sector.
The chief executive is a different guy. Let us see where this chief executive takes his company called Zimbabwe.